The year was 2347, and Captain Daniel Hayes stood on the bridge of the UHSV Titan's Wrath, watching the stars through the reinforced viewing port. The ship stretched nearly 3 kilometers from bow to stern, and every inch of it looked like it had been built for war. Thick armor plates covered the hull in layers, and weapon systems jutted out from every available surface, like the spines of some massive metal beast. Daniel had commanded this ship for 8 years, and he knew every corridor and every battle scar that marked its surface. The bridge crew worked quietly at their stations, and the soft hum of the ship's systems filled the air. Daniel was a man in his late 40s with gray starting to show at his temples and lines around his eyes that spoke of too many hard decisions. He had fought in the colony wars where humans had turned their weapons on each other in conflicts that lasted for decades. Those wars had ended 5 years ago, but the scars remained both on the ships and on the people who served on them. Lieutenant Commander Lisa Park sat at the communication station running through diagnostic checks. She was humanity's chief xenolinguistics officer, though until now that title had been purely theoretical. Humans had explored dozens of star systems and found nothing but empty worlds and ancient ruins. The question of whether humanity was alone in the galaxy had remained unanswered for centuries. That was about to change. The alert came through at 0600 hours ship time. Commander Jake Morrison rushed onto the bridge holding a data pad, and his expression was grim. He was the ship's executive officer and head of the Marine detachment, and Daniel had never seen him look quite so unsettled. "Captain, we have a situation," Jake said, and he pulled up the sensor data on the main display. Long-range stations picked up multiple contacts entering human space near New Perth Colony. "The signatures don't match anything in our database. They're not ours." Daniel felt his pulse quicken, but his voice remained steady. "How many contacts?" 15 vessels, sir. They're holding position just outside the New Perth system. We've lost contact with 3 civilian ships that were in the area, 2 cargo haulers and a passenger liner." The bridge went silent. Daniel looked at the display and watched the unknown signatures pulse on the screen like distant heartbeats. This was it. First contact, and it had already turned bloody. "Get me high command," Daniel said. "And wake up everyone. I want the ship ready to jump in 30 minutes. The next hour passed in a blur of activity. The Titan's Wrath had been in dock for repairs after the colony wars, but it was still the most powerful ship in the human fleet. The crew of 4,000 scrambled to their stations, and engineers worked frantically to bring all systems online. Daniel stood in the ready room with Lisa and Jake going over what little they knew. "We don't know if they're hostile or if this was a misunderstanding," Lisa said, and she pulled up the limited data they had. "The civilian ships might have violated some kind of territorial boundary we didn't know existed." 3 ships don't just disappear," Jake countered. "Something destroyed them," Daniel nodded. "We go in ready for anything, but we don't fire first. Lisa, I need you to prepare every first contact protocol we have. If these aliens can communicate, we need to figure out how and fast." "Understood, Captain," Lisa said, and she was already working on her data pad assembling linguistic algorithms and translation matrices. High Command gave the order, and the Titan's Wrath departed within the hour. 2 other ships were being scrambled, but they would arrive hours behind. Daniel's ship would face whatever was out there alone, at least at first. The jump to New Perth took 6 hours at maximum, faster than light speed. During that time, Daniel walked through the ship, checking on the crew and making sure everyone understood the stakes. They were about to meet an alien species for the first time in human history, and those aliens had already killed humans, whether by accident or design. In the armory, Jake was checking weapons with the Marine detachment. Hundreds of soldiers prepared their gear, and their faces showed a mixture of excitement and fear. Engineering crews worked on the massive reactors that powered the ship, making sure every system had backup power. In the medical bay, doctors prepared for casualties. Daniel returned to his quarters for a brief moment and looked at the photo on his desk. It showed a younger version of himself with a woman and 2 children. His family. They had died in the colony wars when a rival faction bombed the station where they lived. That was 15 years ago, but the pain never quite faded. He fought now so that other families wouldn't have to experience what he had experienced. The ship dropped out of faster-than-light travel, right on schedule. The moment they entered, normal space alarms started blaring. "Contact," the sensor officer called out. "Multiple vessels bearing 270 Mark III. Distance 400,000 kilometers. Reading 15 signatures matching the unknowns." "On screen," Daniel ordered. The main display lit up with an image that made everyone on the bridge catch their breath. The alien ships were like nothing humanity had ever built. They were sleek and elegant with smooth curves and what looked like energy fields shimmering around their hulls. They were also relatively small, with the largest one measuring maybe 400 meters in length. "My God, they're beautiful," Lisa whispered. Daniel was more practical. "Scan for weapons. What happened to our civilian ships?" "Detecting debris field bearing 285 Mark 1, the sensor officer reported. "Matches the ion signatures of the missing vessels." "They were destroyed, sir. Energy weapons by the look of it." The bridge went quiet again. Daniel felt his jaw tighten. Those ships had held families and workers just trying to make a living on the frontier. "Broadcast on all frequencies," Daniel said. "Let them know we're here." The Titan's wrath lit up its running lights, and suddenly the sheer scale of the human ship became apparent. Where the alien vessels were measured in hundreds of meters, the human dreadnought stretched for kilometers. Its hull bristled with weapons and armor plating thick enough to shrug off nuclear blasts. On the alien flagship, Fleet Commander Yazith stared at his display in disbelief. The human ship had just appeared out of nowhere, and it was massive beyond anything in Zephon military doctrine. "What is that thing?" his tactical officer asked. Yazith didn't have an answer. The sensors were having trouble classifying it. It was too large to be a ship, but it was moving under its own power. It looked more like a mobile fortress or perhaps a small armored moon. "Attempt to communicate," Yazith ordered, though his voice carried uncertainty. "Issue a standard territorial warning." On the Titan's wrath, Lisa was frantically analyzing the incoming transmissions. "Captain, I'm receiving something. It's definitely artificial, but the language structure is completely alien. The AI needs time to work on it." "How much time?" Daniel asked. "Hours maybe, or days. We're starting from zero here." Daniel watched as the alien ships began to move, and they were repositioning into what looked like an attack formation. His hand hovered near the weapons control, but he held back. "Power up defensive systems only," he said. "I want shields at maximum and point defense ready, but keep the main guns cold. Let's not start a war if we can avoid it." The alien fleet continued to maneuver, and then one of their ships broke formation. It was smaller than the others, and it was accelerating directly toward the Titan's wrath. "Sir, that vessel is charging weapons," the tactical officer reported. Daniel's mind raced. Every instinct told him to fire first, but he held back for one more moment. Then a beam of brilliant blue energy lanced out from the alien ship and struck the Titan's wrath's forward armor. The bridge shook slightly, and damage reports started coming in. "Minimal damage to forward plate 7, the damage control officer reported. "The shot barely scratched us, sir." Daniel looked at the alien fleet and made his decision. They had fired first. They had killed human civilians, and now they had attacked his ship. He would give them one chance to back down, but he would not let them fire again without consequences. "Illuminate all weapons," Daniel ordered. "I want them to see exactly what they're dealing with. But do not power them up yet. And Lisa, get me a translation fast. We need to talk to these people before this gets worse." Across the Titan's wrath's massive hull, over 200 weapon systems, lit up with targeting lasers and ready indicators. Railguns the size of buildings' missile pods that could launch. Thousands of warheads and energy weapons adapted. From Zephon technology, they had salvaged all activated, their external lights. On the alien flagship, Yazith stared in horror. He had made a terrible mistake, and he was only beginning to understand just how terrible it was. Fleet Commander Yazith had served the Zephon Collective for 40 years, and in that time he had commanded fleets in a dozen different operations. He had negotiated treaties and enforced territorial boundaries across 3 sectors, but nothing in his training or experience had prepared him for what he was looking at now. The human vessel dominated his tactical display, and every sensor reading he received only made the situation more confusing. The ship massed more than all 15 of his vessels combined, and its armor was thicker than anything the Zephon had ever encountered. When his subordinate Korath had fired that warning shot, the beam had simply vanished against the human ship's hull like water on hot metal. "They're not responding." "To our hails," his communications officer reported, and her voice carried an edge of fear that Yazith understood all too well. "Keep trying." Yazith ordered, though he knew it was likely futile. "Use all known communication protocols." On the Titan's wrath, Lisa Park was surrounded by screens filled with alien symbols and sound wave patterns. Her AI systems were working overtime trying to find patterns in the Zephon transmissions. but it was like trying to solve a puzzle when you didn't know what the final picture was supposed to look like. She had her entire linguistics team working with her, and the pressure was immense. Every second that passed without communication was another second closer to war. "I'm getting something," Lisa said suddenly, and she highlighted a section of the transmission. "There's a mathematical sequence here. Basic prime numbers. They're trying to establish that they're intelligent." Daniel moved to her station. "Can we respond?" "Already on it," Lisa said, and her fingers flew across the controls. "I'm sending back the Fibonacci sequence and some basic geometric proofs. It's not language, but it's a start." The response from the Zephon fleet was immediate. More mathematical patterns followed by what looked like visual representations of simple concepts. Circle, triangle, star. The two species were building a foundation for communication, one concept at a time, but then everything went wrong. Korath was a young Zephon commander, and he had risen through the ranks quickly by being aggressive and decisive. He looked at the human ship and saw only a threat to Zephon's superiority. While Yazith was trying to communicate, Korath was planning an attack. He had been assigned to this fleet as punishment for previous insubordination, and he saw this as his chance to prove himself. "That vessel is too dangerous to leave intact," Korath said to his tactical officer. "Prepare a full power strike on their engine section. If we cripple their propulsion, they'll have to negotiate on our terms." "Commander Yazith hasn't authorized an attack," the tactical officer protested. "I'm authorizing it," Korath snapped. "Fire." The beam that struck the Titan's wrath was 10 times more powerful than the warning shot. It carved through space like a burning sword and hit the ship's aft section where the main engines were located. Alarms blared throughout the human vessel, and the bridge shook hard enough to throw crew members from their seats. "Direct hit to engine compartment 4, the damage control officer shouted. "We've got hull breaches on decks 40 through 45. Reactor 4 is offline." "Casualties reported." Daniel grabbed the arms of his command chair as the ship rocked from secondary explosions. His face went hard and cold. They had tried peaceful contact. They had shown restraint even after being fired upon. But now his ship was damaged and his crew was dying. "All hands to battle stations," Daniel ordered, and his voice cut through the chaos like steel. "Power up all weapon systems. Target the vessel that fired on us. Prepare to return fire." "Sir, we don't know if that was an authorized attack," Lisa said desperately. "It might have been a rogue commander. We're so close to establishing communication." Daniel looked at her, and his eyes held the weight of command decisions that had haunted him for years. "They fired first. They killed our civilians, and now they've damaged my ship and killed my crew," we respond. "But Lisa, keep working on that translation. If they want to talk after this, they're going to get their chance." The Titan's wrath came alive with fury. The massive railguns that ran along its spine began to rotate into firing position, and their magnetic coils charging with enough power to accelerate tungsten slugs to devastating velocities. Missile pods opened, revealing hundreds of warheads. Point defense lasers activated, creating an invisible web of protective fire around the ship. Yazith watched in horror as his sensors detected the energy buildup on the human vessel. "Korath, what have you done?" he transmitted on the command frequency. "You just started a war." "A war we can win," Korath responded. "Look at that thing. It's too big to maneuver, too slow to dodge. We'll pick it apart." Korath was wrong. The first railgun fired and the tungsten slug crossed the distance between the ships in seconds. Korath's vessel had shields designed to deflect or absorb energy weapons, but they did nothing against a solid projectile traveling at a fraction of light speed. The slug punched through the shield like it wasn't there and struck the ship's hull. Metal screamed and tore as the projectile carried its momentum through the vessel and out the other side. "Impossible," Korath whispered as his ship's systems began to fail around him. The Titan's wrath fired again and again. 6 railguns spoke in sequence, and each shot hit with devastating precision. Korath's ship was not destroyed, but it was crippled. Its engines were gone. Its weapons were offline. Life support was failing. The elegant Zephon warship tumbled through space-trailing atmosphere and debris. The rest of the Zephon fleet scattered. They had trained for combat against enemies who fought like they did with energy weapons and shields and careful maneuvering. The human approach was brutal and direct. It ignored shields and simply hammered through armor with raw kinetic force. Every tactical doctrine the Zephons had developed over centuries was suddenly useless. "Fleet Commander, we need to retreat," Yazith's tactical officer urged. "That vessel will destroy us all." Yazith made a decision that would define his career. Open a channel to the human ship, all frequencies, and broadcast our surrender protocols. Maybe they'll understand. On the Titan's Wrath, Lisa was still working frantically on the translation when her screen suddenly lit up with new data. Captain, I'm getting something. It's repeating. The same pattern over and over. I think it's a surrender signal. Daniel held up his hand and the weapons fire ceased. The bridge fell silent except for the hum of systems and the distant sound of damage control teams working. He looked at the tactical display showing Korath's crippled vessel and the scattered Zephon fleet. Open a channel, Daniel said. Let's see if we can talk now. Lisa worked her controls and suddenly an image appeared on the main screen. It was grainy and distorted by the communication barriers, but it showed a Zephon face. Yazith was tall and slender with skin that shimmered with iridescent patterns. His large eyes held intelligence and something that looked very much like fear. I am Fleet Commander Yazith of the Zephon Collective. The translation came through choppy and uncertain but understandable. We request ceasefire. The attack was unauthorized. We did not intend war. Daniel studied the alien commander for a long moment. I am Captain Daniel Hayes of the United Human Space Vessel Titan's Wrath. Your ships destroyed 3 of our civilian vessels. You fired on my ship without provocation. Give me one reason why I shouldn't finish this. Because we made a mistake, Yazith said, and the translation carried the weight of his words. We thought you were invading our territory. We did not know humans existed until today. The loss of your civilian ships was a terrible error. And the attack on your vessel was the action of one commander, not my fleet. We request permission to rescue the crew of the damaged vessel. Then we will withdraw and report this contact to our government. Daniel glanced at Lisa, who nodded encouragingly. He looked at Jake, who remained stone-faced. The decision was his alone. You may recover your crew, Daniel said finally, but you will do so under our weapons. One wrong move and I will not hesitate. And Commander Yazith, we need to talk about the 300 people who died on our civilian ships. That debt needs to be addressed. Agreed, Yazith said, and relief flooded his features. We will make this right, Captain Hayes. The Zephon Collective honors its obligations. As the Zephon rescue ships moved carefully toward Korath's crippled vessel, Lisa continued working on improving the translation. Slowly, haltingly, the 2 species began to communicate. They exchanged basic information about their cultures, their territories, and their history. And with each exchange, the aliens looked more and more disturbed. Captain Hayes, Yazith said after an hour of careful dialogue, may I ask about your vessel? How many ships of this class does humanity possess? Daniel considered the question. Honesty might prevent future conflicts. The Titan's Wrath is one of 57 Dreadnought-class warships in active service. We have hundreds of smaller vessels as well. Why do you ask? Yazith's face went still. Because, Captain, your ship carries more firepower than our entire sector fleet. And you built 57 of them. What kind of enemy requires such weapons? Daniel's expression darkened. Ourselves, he said quietly. We built these ships to fight each other. The colony wars lasted 30 years and cost millions of lives. We learned to be very good at destruction. The implications of that statement hung in the air between them. Then Yazith's sensor officer in the Kryn swarm descended on New Perth like a living nightmare. Their bioships looked nothing like the vessels humanity or the Zephons built. They were organic creatures grown in the depths of space with hulls that pulsed and writhed as if breathing. Each ship was covered in chitinous armor and bristled with biological weapons that fired acid and parasitic organisms instead of conventional munitions. There were 53 of them, and they moved with a coordination that spoke of hive intelligence rather than individual thought. Daniel watched the tactical display as the Kryn ignored both human and Zephon vessels and focused entirely on the colony below. They're not even acknowledging us, he said. It's like we don't matter to them. To them, we probably don't, Lisa said as she worked frantically to analyze the Kryn communications. These signals aren't language in any conventional sense. It's more like chemical markers or pheromone trails. They're not trying to communicate with us at all. We're just obstacles in their way. The colony's distress calls grew more desperate. New Perth was home to 40,000 people spread across 3 major settlements and dozens of smaller outposts. They had minimal defenses because this far into human territory no one had expected an attack. Now they were being bombarded by weapons that dissolved buildings and converted organic matter into something else entirely. Captain, we're picking up biological contamination on the planet's surface. the science officer reported. The Kryn are deploying some kind of spores. If they take root in the ecosystem, they'll convert the entire planet. Daniel felt ice run through his veins. This wasn't just an attack. It was an invasion that would transform New Perth into something alien and hostile. He opened a channel to Yazith's flagship. "Commander, I need to know everything you know about the Kryn. How do we fight them?" Yazith's image appeared on screen and his face showed the strain of rapid calculations. "They rely on overwhelming numbers and biological weapons. Their ships are tough but not as armored as yours. They excel at boarding actions and close combat. The Zephon Collective has fought them 3 times in the past century. Each time we barely survived and only by abandoning the contested territory. We're not abandoning 40,000 people," Daniel said flatly. "We need a strategy and we need it now." Jake leaned over the tactical display studying the Kryn formation. "Captain, they're focused on the planet. If we hit them hard enough, maybe we can draw them off the colony and into a fight in space where we have the advantage." "Agreed," Yazith added. "My ships are faster than both yours and theirs. We can conduct hit-and-run attacks to draw their attention while your vessel provides heavy fire support." Daniel nodded. "Do it. All ships engage. Target any Kryn vessel within range of the colony. Draw them away from the civilians." The Titan's wrath surged forward and its massive engines pushing it toward the swarm. The Zephon vessels scattered in a coordinated pattern, and their sleek forms darting around the slower Kryn bioships. Energy beams lanced out from the Zephon fleet, striking Kryn vessels and burning holes in their organic armor. The aliens responded immediately, and dozens of bioships broke off from the planetary bombardment to face this new threat. "Here they come," Jake said. "All weapons free. Light them up." The Titan's wrath opened fire with everything it had. Railguns thundered, sending tungsten slugs into the Kryn formation. Missiles streaked away from their pods, trailing fire as they accelerated toward their targets. Point defense lasers created a web of destruction around the ship, cutting down smaller Kryn organisms that tried to approach. The space between the human ship and the alien swarm became a hell of explosions and weapons fire. The Kryn ships died, but not easily. Their organic hulls could absorb tremendous damage, and even when mortally wounded, they continued fighting. One bioship took 6 railgun hits and kept coming until it collided with a Zephon cruiser. The impact was devastating. Kryn organisms swarmed over the Zephon vessel and began burning through its hull with acid secretions. "We've got boarders on the Vigilant," Yazith reported, and his voice tight with stress. "They're losing hull integrity. Crew is evacuating." Daniel watched as the Zephon cruiser was consumed by the dying Kryn ship. Both vessels exploded in a bloom of fire and debris. 23 Zephon lives lost in an instant. He pushed down the anger and focused on the bigger picture. They were buying time for the colony, but not enough. "Captain, the spore contamination is spreading," the science officer reported. "At this rate, the entire northern continent will be infected within 6 hours." Lisa looked up from her station. "Daniel, we need to stop those spores at the source. Can we get the Titan's wrath into the atmosphere?" Jake's head snapped around. "That's insane. This ship wasn't designed for atmospheric operations. The stress on the hull could tear us apart." "But it's possible," Lisa insisted. "We have point defense systems covering every angle of the ship. If we get low enough, we could burn those spores out of the air before they spread." Daniel looked at his executive officer. Jake met his gaze and after a moment nodded grimly. "It's risky as hell, sir, but it might work. We'd have to bring the ship in slowly and maintain altitude with maneuvering thrusters. It'll burn through fuel like crazy." "Do it," Daniel ordered. "Yazith, your fleet keeps the Kryn off our back while we handle the ground situation. Can you manage that?" "We will hold them, Captain," Yazith responded. "For your people and for all of us." The Titan's wrath began its descent into New Perth's atmosphere. The ship groaned and shuddered as it entered the upper air layers. Warning lights flashed across every console and structural stress alarms blared. The massive vessel was never meant to operate in a gravity well, but human engineering had built in redundancies and overcompensation. Slowly, carefully, the dreadnought pushed through the clouds. "Altitude 50,000 meters, the pilot reported, and her hands steady on the controls despite the ship bucking like a living thing. Hull temperature rising but within acceptable parameters. Structural integrity holding at 92%. Daniel stood at the center of the bridge watching the planet's surface grow larger on the screens. He could see the settlements below and the dark stains spreading across the landscape where Kryn spores were taking root. "All point defense batteries prepare to fire." I want a continuous sweep pattern. Burn everything that doesn't belong. The Titan's wrath became a flying fortress hovering over the infected zones. Hundreds of laser turrets activated and began firing in coordinated patterns. Each beam was designed to intercept incoming missiles and fighters, but against biological spores they were perfectly suited. The air itself seemed to ignite as the defense grid swept back and forth, vaporizing anything organic that didn't match Earth-based life signatures. On the ground, the colonists watched in awe as the massive ship blocked out the sun and rained fire from the sky. The Kryn contamination began to recede and the spreading infection halted. Children who moments before had been crying in fear now pointed at the metal giant above them. Hope replaced terror, but in space the battle was going poorly. The Zephon fleet was outnumbered and outmatched. Their hit-and-run tactics worked, but the Kryn had too many ships. 3 more Zephon vessels were destroyed and the rest were taking heavy damage. Yazith's flagship had lost shields and was fighting on maneuvering thrusters alone. Captain Hayes. Yazith's transmission was filled with static. We cannot hold much longer. You must complete your mission and return to space. Jake checked the sensors. Sir, we've eliminated about 60% of the spore contamination, but there are still hot zones in the southern hemisphere. If we leave now, the infection could restart. Daniel faced an impossible choice. Stay and save the colony completely but lose their allies in space, or return to the battle and risk the Kryn reinfecting the planet. He looked at Lisa, who was monitoring both the ground situation and the space battle. What would they do? Daniel asked quietly. The Kryn, what's their priority? Lisa's eyes widened. The Queen ship. Jake, earlier you said something about how the Kryn move with coordination. It's a hive mind. There has to be a central control vessel. Find it, Daniel ordered. The science team worked frantically scanning the Kryn fleet for anything that stood out. Then they found it. Deep in the swarm, hidden among the smaller bioships, was a massive vessel, 3 times the size of any other. It wasn't attacking. It wasn't maneuvering. It was just there coordinating the others. That's it, Lisa said. That's the Queen. If we kill that ship, the rest might scatter. Daniel made his decision. Helm, get us back into space. Maximum acceleration. All hands brace for emergency ascent. The Titan's wrath roared upward through the atmosphere. Metal screamed and hull plates buckled, but the ship held together. Within minutes, they cleared the atmosphere and were back among the stars. The Kryn swarm was spread out across the orbital space, with the Zephon fleet barely holding on at the edges. All power to forward weapons, Daniel commanded. Plot a ramming course for that Queen ship. We're going straight through them. Sir, that's suicide, the tactical officer protested. No, Daniel said. That's war. Jake, get your Marines ready. We're about to have uninvited guests. The Titan's wrath charged into the heart of the Kryn swarm like an avalanche. Smaller bioships tried to block its path and were simply crushed or thrown aside. The Dreadnought's armor took hit after hit from AC. The aftermath of the battle left both fleets in desperate need of repair. The Titan's wrath had taken damage across 30% of its hull, and the Kryn boarding parties had killed 147 crew members before Jake and his Marines finally cleared the ship. The Zephon fleet had lost 5 vessels completely, and the remaining ships were running on backup systems. But they had survived, and more importantly, they had proven that cooperation between their species was possible. Daniel stood in the ship's medical bay looking at the rows of injured crew members. Human doctors worked alongside Zephon medical officers who had beamed over to help. The aliens' healing technology was more advanced than humanity's, and they shared it freely. A young Marine named Kevin Brooks lay in a bed with his chest wrapped in what looked like living tissue. It was Zephon biogel that accelerated healing and prevented infection. He would live because of alien medicine. Captain, Kevin said weakly when he noticed Daniel. Did we win, sir? We won, Daniel confirmed. You and your team held engineering. Without you, the ship would have been lost. You're a hero, Kevin. The young man smiled and closed his eyes. Daniel moved on, checking each bed and speaking with each wounded crew member. It was the hardest part of command, but also the most important. These people had trusted him with their lives, and some had paid the ultimate price. Lisa found him an hour later in the observation deck, staring out at New Perth below. The planet looked peaceful from orbit, with no sign of the horror that had nearly consumed it. The translation algorithms are working much better now, she said. Yazith wants to meet with you face to face. He's proposing a formal alliance. Now that was fast, Daniel said. The Kryn changed everything, Lisa explained. Both our governments are scared, Daniel. If one queen ship and 50 biovessels could do this much damage, what happens when they come back with a real fleet? Daniel nodded slowly. He had been thinking the same thing. The Kryn had retreated, but they weren't destroyed. Somewhere out in deep space they were regrouping and learning from their defeat. Set up the meeting. And Lisa, make sure both governments know what happened here. The truth without any political spin. 2 days later, Daniel took a shuttle to the surface of New Perth, where a temporary conference center had been set up. Yazith arrived in a Zephon transport, and for the first time the two commanders met in person, rather than through screens. The Zephon was taller than Daniel by half a meter, and his skin shifted colors subtly as he moved, reflecting his emotional state. Right now it showed shades of blue and green, which Lisa had explained meant respect and cautious optimism. "Captain Hayes," Yazith said, and his voice carried through a translation device that hung around his neck. "I owe you a debt that can never be fully repaid. You saved my fleet and your colony when you could have abandoned both. We fight together or we die alone," Daniel replied. "That's a lesson humanity learned the hard way during our colony. Wars. I won't make that mistake again." They walked together, through the conference center, passing human and Zephon personnel who were working side by side to coordinate relief efforts. The contrast between the species was striking. Humans were shorter and bulkier, built for endurance. Zephons were tall and graceful, evolved for precision. But both species had hands that could create and eyes that could think, and that was enough. The formal negotiations took place over 3 days. Representatives from both governments participated through faster-than-light communications, though there was significant delay. Earth's government was cautious about committing to an alliance with an alien species they had only known for a week. The Zephon Collective's ruling council was equally hesitant, worried about the military implications of partnering with a species that built weapons like the Titans' wrath. But the threat of the Kryn pushed both sides toward agreement. Lisa worked with a Zephon diplomat named Sebeth to draft the treaty terms. It wasn't a full military alliance yet, but it was a mutual defense pact. If the Kryn attacked either species, the other would respond. Intelligence would be shared. Technology would be exchanged. And most importantly, communication channels would remain open. Jake spent his time working with Zephon military officers, analyzing the battle and identifying lessons learned. The Zephons were fascinated by human tactics, especially the willingness to take damage in order to close distance. "Your people fight like you have nothing to lose," one Zephon officer observed. "We fight like we have everything to lose," Jake corrected. "Every ship has families waiting at home. We take risks because the alternative is watching those families die." The Zephon officer's skin rippled with colors Jake didn't recognize. Later, Sebeth explained it was a sign of deep respect mixed with sadness. The Zephons were warriors, but they had never experienced the total warfare that had defined human history. They were learning that sometimes survival required sacrifices they had never imagined. On the 4th day after the battle, long-range sensors detected something that made everyone's blood run cold. A massive Kryn fleet had been spotted 3 systems away, and it was heading toward both human and Zephon territory. The scout ship that detected them counted over 200 biovessels, including multiple queen ships. It was an invasion force large enough to overwhelm any single colony or outpost. Daniel was in a strategy meeting when the news arrived. Around the table sat human officers, Zephon commanders, and civilian officials from both species. The mood shifted instantly from cautious optimism to grim determination. "This is what we feared," Yazith said. "The Kryn don't forgive defeat. They're coming back in overwhelming force." "Then we meet them with overwhelming force of our own," Daniel replied. He pulled up a star map showing human and Zephon territories. "How many ships can each of us commit?" The numbers were calculated quickly. Humanity could assemble 10 warships, including 3 dreadnoughts, within 2 weeks. The Zephon Collective could provide 20 vessels, though most were lighter cruisers and destroyers. It was a respectable force, but against 200 Kryn bioships it might not be enough. "We need a strategy that plays to our strengths," Jake said. He highlighted a nebula region between the approaching Kryn fleet and their territories. "If we can draw them here, the sensor interference would neutralize some of their numerical advantage." Sebeth studied the map with multifaceted eyes that saw into spectrums humans couldn't perceive. The Kryn use pheromone trails for coordination. In a nebula, those signals would be disrupted. "It could work, but we'd need bait," a human admiral named Gregory Foster pointed out. He had arrived from Earth along with additional ships and supplies. "Something valuable enough to make the Kryn commit their full force." Everyone looked at Daniel. The Titan's Wrath was the obvious choice. The Kryn had seen it destroy their queen ship. They would want revenge, and the massive human dreadnought would be too tempting a target to ignore. "I'll do it," Daniel said. "But I'm not going alone. Yazith, I need your fastest ships to coordinate hit-and-run attacks while we draw them in. And Admiral Foster, I need those other dreadnoughts positioned at the nebula's far edge ready to spring the trap." The planning continued for hours. Every ship would have a role. Every captain would know exactly what was expected. This wouldn't be like the desperate defense at New Perth. This would be a coordinated operation between two species who were learning to fight as one. Lisa worked with Sevith to establish better communication protocols. They developed a shared tactical language that could be transmitted quickly, even through the interference of battle. Simple codes that meant attack, retreat, regroup, or help. It was crude compared to normal communications, but in the chaos of combat, it might save lives. Jake prepared his Marines for another potential boarding action. He knew the Kryn would try the same tactic again, and this time they needed to be ready. He requisitioned Zephon plasma weapons and trained his people in their use. The aliens' technology was more effective against Kryn armor than conventional bullets. On the 6th day after the battle, the combined fleet departed New Perth. 10 human warships and 20 Zephon vessels flying in formation toward an uncertain future. On the Titan's Wrath's bridge, Daniel watched the other ships keeping pace with his massive dreadnought. Human and alien working together not because they wanted to, but because they had to. "Captain, we're receiving a transmission from Earth," the communications officer reported. "It's the Secretary General. She wants to speak with you." The screen activated, showing a woman in her 60s with gray hair and sharp eyes. Secretary General Helen Price had led humanity through the end of the colony wars and the difficult peace that followed. "Captain Hayes, I've been reading the reports about New Perth. You started a war and made an alliance all in the same week." "The Kryn started the war, ma'am," Daniel replied. "I just made sure we had friends when we fought back." Helen's expression softened slightly. "I know, Daniel. And for what it's worth, I think you made the right call. The Council has approved the defense pact with the Zephon Collective. We're also sending 6 more dreadnoughts and 40 support vessels. They'll arrive in 10 days. The battle will be over by then one way or another," Daniel said. "I know," Helen replied. "That's why I'm sending them. Win or lose, Daniel, we're committed now. Humanity is no longer alone in the galaxy, and that changes everything." "Good hunting, Captain." The nebula stretched across space like a wound in reality. Clouds of gas and dust glowed with eerie colors as radiation from nearby stars illuminated the cosmic fog. Inside this maze of matter and energy, the combined human and Zephon fleet waited in silence. Sensors were nearly useless here. Communication was difficult. But that worked both ways, and the Kryn would face the same problems. Daniel stood on the bridge of the Titan's Wrath, checking readiness reports from every ship in the fleet. The dreadnought was positioned at the nebula's center like bait in a trap. Around it, the other ships were hidden in the densest clouds where even the Kryn's biological sensors would struggle to detect them. Everything depended on timing and coordination. If the plan failed, they would all die here. "Captain, the Kryn fleet is entering sensor range," the tactical officer reported. "Count is 212 vessels. Multiple queen ships confirmed." Lisa worked at her station analyzing the Kryn formation. "They're moving in a standard swarm pattern, but there's something different. They're being more cautious than at New Perth. I think they learned from that battle." "Good," Jake said from his position near the weapons console. "That means they're thinking. Thinking enemies make mistakes." The Kryn fleet approached, slowly sweeping the nebula with sensor beams. Their bioships moved through the clouds like sharks through murky water. Then they detected the Titan's Wrath sitting alone and apparently vulnerable in the open space. The reaction was immediate. Dozens of bioships broke formation and accelerated toward the human dreadnought. "Here they come," Daniel said calmly. "All ships hold position. Wait for my signal." The Kryn swarmed forward, eager for revenge against the ship that had killed their queen. They fired from long range with acid projectiles and bioplasma weapons. The shots splashed against the Titan's Wrath's armor, doing minimal damage. Daniel let them come closer, drawing more ships away from the main fleet. On the Zephon flagship, Yazith watched his tactical display with 3 of his eyes, while the 4th monitored the human communication channel. "Captain Hayes has steady nerves," he said to his crew. "He's letting them get within point-blank range." "That's insane," his tactical officer replied. If they board his ship again, then we follow the plan, Yazith interrupted. Trust the humans. They know what they're doing. The Kryn were now surrounding the Titan's wrath from all sides. Nearly 80 bioships had committed to the attack, leaving the main fleet exposed. Daniel counted to 10 in his head, giving them time to fully commit. Then he gave the order. All ships execute. Hit them now. The nebula exploded with weapons fire. Human warships emerged from the clouds on one side, hammering the Kryn with railguns and missiles. Zephon vessels attacked from the opposite direction, using their energy weapons to cut through bioship hulls. The trap had been sprung perfectly, and the Kryn found themselves caught between two forces. The Titan's wrath didn't try to escape the encirclement. Instead, it activated every point defense system and created a sphere of destruction around itself. Kryn bioships that got too close were shredded by laser fire. Those that tried to pull back ran into the coordinated assault from the rest of the fleet. Within minutes, 40 Kryn vessels were destroyed or crippled, but the main Kryn fleet was still intact, and now they understood the danger. The Queen ships at the center of the formation began broadcasting new pheromone commands. The swarm reorganized, abandoning the attack on the Titan's wrath and forming a defensive sphere around their queens. It was a smart move that showed the Kryn were adapting to human and Zephon tactics. They're learning too fast, Jake observed. We need to press the advantage before they figure out a counter-strategy, Daniel agreed. All human ships form on the Titan's wrath. Zephon fleet continue hit and run attacks on their flanks. We're going straight through the center. Admiral Foster's voice came through from the dreadnought Indomitable. Captain Hayes, that's 4 Queen ships protected by over 100 biovessels. Even with all our firepower, that's a tough nut to crack. Then we crack it together, Daniel replied. All dreadnoughts advance in wedge formation. Cruisers and destroyers provide covering fire. We end this here. The 3 human dreadnoughts moved forward side by side with the Titan's wrath at the point of the wedge. Behind them, smaller vessels laid down suppressing fire, keeping the Kryn from flanking the advance. It was a brutal, straightforward assault that relied on human ships being tougher than anything the Kryn could throw at them. The Kryn responded with everything they had. Bioplasma weapons fired continuously. Acid missiles exploded against armor plating. Boarding craft launched by the dozens trying to latch onto the human ships, but the dreadnoughts kept moving, their thick armor absorbing punishment that would have vaporized lighter vessels. Inside, the Titan's wrath, Jake led marine teams through the corridors, fighting off Kryn boarders for the second time in a week. The fighting was even more intense than at New Perth. Kryn warriors seemed to pour from every breach in the hull. But this time the Marines were ready with Zephon plasma weapons and new tactics developed specifically for close combat against the insectoid aliens. Section 12 is clear, Jake reported between bursts of weapons fire. Sealing the breach now. More reports came in from across the ship. The Kryn were trying to overwhelm them with numbers, but human determination and Zephon technology were holding the line. In engineering, Kevin Brooks had been released from medical early at his own insistence. He fought alongside his team, protecting the reactor cores that powered the ship's weapons and shields. On the bridge, Daniel monitored both the space battle and the fighting inside his ship. The stress was immense, but he forced himself to stay focused. Leaders couldn't afford to break down in the middle of combat. There would be time for that later if they survived. The dreadnoughts reached the Kryn defensive sphere and began hammering at it with concentrated fire. The bioships fought back desperately, but human armor was proving superior to Kryn biological weapons. Slowly, steadily, the wedge pushed deeper into the formation. The Zephon fleet maintained their hit-and-run attacks, striking at exposed Kryn vessels and then darting away before the aliens could respond effectively. Yazith coordinated his ships with practiced precision, using the nebula's interference to mask their movements. Every attack was calculated to draw Kryn forces away from the center and break up their defensive formation. Lisa worked frantically at her station, trying to decode the pheromone communications between the Queen ships. Daniel, I'm seeing something. The Queens are coordinating, but there's one that seems to be giving orders to the others. If we can identify which one, do it, Daniel said. Find me the primary Queen and we end this. It took Lisa 3 precious minutes of analysis while the battle raged around them. She filtered through the chemical signals, looking for patterns that indicated hierarchy. Then she found it. Target acquired. Transmitting coordinates now. It's the largest bioship at bearing 045 Mark 6. Daniel didn't hesitate. All dreadnoughts concentrate fire on that target. Everything we have. The Titan's Wrath, the Indomitable, and the third dreadnought Valiant all turned their main weapons toward the primary queen ship. Railguns that could punch through small moons. Missile batteries that carried enough firepower to crack a planet's crust. Energy weapons adapted from Zephon technology. All of it focused on a single target. The primary queen tried to escape, but she was too large and too slow. The first salvo stripped away her outer defenses. The second penetrated deep into her organic hull. The third triggered a catastrophic failure of her internal systems. The massive bioship convulsed once and then exploded from within, spreading debris and biological matter across thousands of kilometers. The effect on the Kryn swarm was immediate and devastating. Without the primary queen's coordination, the other queens began issuing conflicting orders. The swarm's unity shattered. Some bioships continued fighting. Others fled into faster-than-light travel. Still others simply stopped responding to commands and drifted aimlessly. "Press the attack," Daniel ordered. "Take out the remaining queens before they can reorganize." The combined fleet surged forward. Human ships used their superior firepower to destroy the confused Kryn vessels. Zephon ships darted in and out, finishing off crippled bioships and preventing any from escaping to warn other swarms. The battle became a rout. 2 hours later, it was over. Of the 212 Kryn bioships that entered the nebula, only 16 escaped into faster-than-light travel. The rest were destroyed or captured for study. The victory was complete, but the cost had been high. The dreadnought Valiant was crippled and would need months of repairs. 8 Zephon vessels were destroyed. Casualty counts were still coming in, but Daniel knew they would be in the thousands. He sat in his command chair, feeling every one of his years. Around him, the bridge crew worked to secure the ship and coordinate rescue operations. Jake appeared at the bridge entrance, covered in soot and blood, but alive. He gave Daniel a tired salute. "Ship is secure, sir. We cleared the last borders 10 minutes ago. Casualties are heavy, but engineering and life support are intact." "Good work, Jake," Daniel said. "Get yourself to medical, and that's an order." Jake smiled weakly. "Aye, sir." Lisa approached with Sevith, who had been coordinating Zephon fleet movements throughout the Batty.